there were a lot of people who did live all their lives in India, and then in 1947, when India became independent, they came back to the homeland and they didn't know anything about it.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Beneath the Page, the podcast about books and the writers behind them. I'm Steve Couch.
I'm Sophie Beal, and today we have Kathleen McGurl.
Hi, Kathleen. Good to have you.
And she's just written her 15th dual timeline historical novel, but as well, she's collaborated with Millie Bobby Brown, and the book I'm most interested in is Give Up Ironing, A Writer's Guide to Time Management. So how did you start writing?
It was something I was always going to do at some point when I had time. And it took a while to realise that nobody was going to give me a year off work to write a novel. So I thought, well, I just have to sit down and write one anyway. And I started trying to write novels, and then I moved into short stories. Don't take so long. Sold quite a few to women's magazines. And that's the great moment when you sell your first short story and somebody has paid you for something that you made up. Then at that point, I thought, maybe I can do this. So I moved back to novels after maybe 10 years of writing short stories and bringing up children and dealing with disabled mother and that sort of thing. And I thought, I'm going to try and write dual timeline. I really enjoyed genealogy. And there's a self-published novel out there which is based some characters that I discovered in my own family tree. And then with that one, I was sort of constrained by the facts of what actually happened. So I thought it'd be much more fun to just make it up and just go wherever I wanted to go. There's that phrase with genealogy that you might discover a skeleton in your family's closet.
Yes.
And I thought, well, what if rather than the metaphorical skeleton in a closet, there was an actual skeleton buried in the garden of a house where you know your ancestors lived? And that's started my first dual timeline, which was the Emerald Comb.
Brilliant. What is the appeal of dual timelines? Is there some element of the past speaking to the present?
There is, yeah, and history repeating itself. And also I feel it's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts if you get it right. So you've got a historical story and you've got the contemporary story, and they're often linked thematically, and then you weave them together. And what I like to do is alternate chapters.
Yes.
So I've got a whole chapter in one and then a whole chapter in the other. And that sort of helps tie them together. And the reader knows where they're at with it. Not everybody likes them, but those that do really like them,
yes.
I find. Yes. So you get a lot of really loyal fans, if I can say fans, who will just read everything I've written, really.
Well, let's focus in on your most recent book, The Lost Diamond. Could you tell us a little about that?
So, it's set in India, but the inspiration behind it came from a little newspaper article. It must be 10 years ago or something. I snipped it out of a newspaper. And I just hung on to it, knowing that sooner or later I'd write a novel around this. It took me a while to get to it. But and the snippet was about, in the Alps, there had been a plane crash on the near the summit of Mont Blanc. The actual plane crash was in 1952, and there was a massive, massive storm at the time. So nobody survived, and they weren't able to get to the wreckage before it was all completely covered with snow and entombed in the ice. And then bit by bit, parts of that plane crash have been brought down in glaciers. Down to, and then with global warming as well, every now and then something turns up, and it might be part of a seat. I hate to think it might be body parts, but who knows? Let's not go
back
there.
To the skeleton in the garden again, aren't we?
We are. But one thing that did come down one time, and this is the new clipping, was a watch. It didn't say whether it was on anybody's, let's not talk about it. Anyway, this watch came down and it was engraved on the back. And the person that found it managed to track down descendants of the person that the watch belonged to and reunited it with them. And as soon as I read that, I thought, that has dual timeline novel written all over it. That I have to do that. And then the fact that the actual plane crash was Air India made me think of India. But I didn't want to 1952 was when that actually happened, and I thought, I don't want 1952, I want 1947, because that's just before Indian independence. Really interesting time for the country. So India didn't exist then, so I made it BAE, I think. And India made me think of diamonds, cursed diamonds like the Koh-i-Noor. And so it all sort of came together from that, really. The prologue starts with the plane crash and the character on it, and he loses his briefcase that contains something very valuable, which is then found by a couple of women who are hiking in the Mont Blanc area.
Brilliant. And I very much enjoyed it. I don't know about Steve.
I did as well.
Thank you.
Contractually obliged to say that, but in this case, it's true.
Thank you. It's a novel that it almost wrote itself. I enjoyed the research, just I wasn't getting too much into the politics of what happened during Indian independence. It was more about what life was like for people then. But of course, there was a lot of riots and that sort of thing. So I was able to feed those into the novel. And I did need to know enough of the politics for the background, that's the backdrop there, because my historical characters, Wilfred is a civil servant in India at the time and kind of looking forward to going home, as he calls it. Even though he spent all his life in India.
And thinking about the past timeline, I personally really admired how even-handed you were with Wilfred and his daughter's point of view. When you were in her head, you were very much sympathised with her, even though, and I say this as a teenage mum, goodness didn't I understand poor old Wilfred's point of view, not wanting Celia to get involved in riots or but she was very determined to go her own way. Did you feel more for Wilfred or Celia secretly?
Celia, I think. I mean, I think Wilfred's a product of his time.
Yes,
He's almost Victorian in some ways in the way he treats her. But, he's had a tough time. His wife died when Celia was only a child. And then he's had to be a single parent in India in those times. And that's not easy. And then Celia is headstrong. But I really like Celia. She's one of my favourite characters I've ever read.
One of the things that struck me when I read the book is across the two timelines, you've got 3 sets of child and father relations. And to some extent, in all of them, the child is the more sympathetic character. The easier one for the reader to relate to and root for. And I wondered, was that a deliberate?
I think it was in a way, Wilfred was always supposed to be the way he came out. And then the other one you've got in the present day, Ben, whose father is a politician. And I wanted Ben to be sort of down to earth. I mean, his surname is Forbes White, and Forbes spelt with a double F. He has simplified it for himself, just one F, and got rid of the white part of it, just Ben Forbes. He just wants to be more straightforward. His father's a little bit more pretentious, really. Yeah, that was intentional, really, that we'd like Ben.
And I think, without wanting to plot spoil for anyone who's not read the books yet, Celia and Ben and the other VJ, who's in the historical thing, all 3 of them, to a greater or lesser extent, have quite authoritarian parents.
They do.
And have to assert their independence. And I wondered how that relates to India at that time and what was going on politically.
It's interesting because you're making me think about it in almost different ways.
So what we're saying is I'm reading far too much into it.
No, it's good. I like that. I mean, it does sort of show the passage of time from Wilfred and Vijay's father, who's the Maharaja. So they're the pre-independent India generation, and then you've got Celia and Vijay, who are the next generation on, and you've got Ben and Lisa. Lisa and Ben are the next generation on again. So there is that time progressing and people's attitudes.
And I think Lisa's ex-boyfriend, who we meet early on, he feels like he belongs with the parents.
He's just a unpleasant city boy. We don't like him.
All the way through the book, there's a tension between different characters around the diamond and around the idea that the diamond is cursed. And there's some characters who put a lot of weight in that idea, and other characters who are very dismissive and regard it as superstitious mumbo jumbo. Where do your sympathies lie as a writer and more broadly on that kind of question?
It's a piece of rock. I don't believe in cursed diamonds. I do love the idea of that being a central theme to the story, though.
I don't think it would work without it.
I agree. I think it does need that element in there.
I would agree with you in my general leanings on that kind of thing. At the same time, as a reader, you buy into it.
Yeah, you do.
In the world of the book, the curse is a real thing. Even if some characters don't believe it, as a reader, you're thinking, no, you can't ignore the curse.
It's a bit like ghost stories. Back when I was writing short stories, I wrote quite a lot of ghost stories, and some of them can be read in my little book, Ghost Stories and How to Write Them. And one thing, and I write about that in that book, when you're writing a ghost story, you need to present an alternative rational explanation. So if you believe in ghosts, you can buy into that. But if you don't believe in ghosts, it's not spoilt for you, and you can see, okay, well, it's just like that. And I tried to do that with the Lost Diamond, in that if you want to believe in that a diamond can be cursed and that curse can be real and have real world effects, then you can believe that. But if you think it's all a load of mumbo jumbo, you can also go down that route. So it should work for both sets of readers.
So Celia very deliberately chooses India over Britain. Even though she's got British nationality, she feels much more Indian than British. She was born there, she was brought up entirely there. Her ayah had a very strong part in bringing her up, even more so when her mother died early, kind of thing. She goes round a lot of the time wearing Indian clothes even, and feels very oppressed by her father trying to impose Britishness on her. It really made me question what makes you belong to one place or another.
Well, this came out of the research really that I did, that there were a lot of people like my fictional Forbes White family who did live all their lives in India, and then in 1947, when India became independent, they came back to the homeland.
Yes,
and they didn't know anything about it, and they real fish out of water. Obviously, the climate's so completely different, the culture, the everything really, and even a lot of that generation, the British Raj, they had tried to keep English customs going in their households in India, but even so, it's necessarily very different. And of course, they were coming back to a post-war England that was really quite depressed and bomb damage everywhere.
Rational.
And they'd had loads of servants in India, and then they were coming back to an England where, no, you couldn't get any servants because there was no unemployment. Everybody was employed in rebuilding the country after the war. You could not live in the same way that they had done in India. I mean, that's a whole other story, isn't it, to write from the point of view of somebody that has come back to England then. But yeah, I definitely wanted Celia to feel Indian, to want to stay in India no matter what happened. And that's quite an important point in the story, her trying to stay.
Did you deliberately write the diamond and the tension between the people in the book as some kind of metaphor for what was happening at the time of independence, or did that just naturally come through?
As I was writing it, I realised that was happening, and you've got that tug between India and England and what's best. And of course, in India, Mountbatten was sort of parachuted in to oversee the independence movement, and it was not. I mean, I don't know that it could it have been done better. I'm sure it could, because they drew a line on a map and said,
"This is Pakistan, and
this is India. If you're Hindu, get that side. If you're Muslim, get that side." And of course, it led to horrific riots, which I don't go into all that much in the book. I do a little bit, so it could have been done better. I don't know if at that time anybody else would have done a better job than Mountbatten. It's a tricky one, but that whole tug, that jarring of cultures. As I was writing it, I thought, it is a bit metaphorical.
And as we said earlier, you've now written 15 books with a similar structure, and they're all historical. Are there common themes that you find yourself returning to time and time again?
I try and make the sort of high-level themes different, but there are a few that I guess are sort of history repeating or parallels. It's an easier thing to do, to come back to that and then have your modern day characters learn from the past. But I try and have a theme that's to do with motherhood or loyalty or betrayal or something like that, and have that as a different theme in each book.
What about periods? Do you have favourite periods that you keep going back to, or how widely do you spread the net?
And I think my earliest are the late 18th century. I've got The Storm Girl, which is set in the smugglers in Christchurch and Mudderford, which is late 18th century. And I've got Secret of the Chateau, which is French Revolution. And that's obviously 1789. And then I've gone through to, this one, I think The Lost Diamond, 1947.
It's your latest, isn't it?
Apart from the one that's coming, which I'm due to get the edits later today.
Oh, that's exciting.
And that one, the historical, and I've got to do this, right, is 1976.
Ooh, as somebody who was born before that.
I remember it so very, very clearly. So it's the hot summer of 1976. I mean, I like the 1930s, the feel that as a reader, we know there's a big thing coming. It's right on the horizon. Yeah. You know what's coming. And that gives another element. But I also quite like being in sort of early Victorian. It depends what you need in a book. Like if you need your characters to be able to get from one end of the country to another, you need to be far enough into the Victorian period that there are trains. Otherwise, it's going to take you days by horse and cart to get from one end to the other. But on the other hand, if you want that feeling of isolation, that you're a village that is almost unattached from everything around it and it's a day's journey to get to the nearest city, then you go a bit earlier and go pre-railway.
Stepping away from the books, if you had to live in one of the periods that you've written about, which one would you like to live in?
This sounds awful, but I quite like the well-off people in the 1930s living in that bubble that they were in. That must have been nice to be in that bubble. Yeah, like Ian McEwan's Atonement. I don't know if you've seen the film.
Yes.
Yeah, you kind of want to be part of that country house.
Yes.
But
before anybody really knew that was
but you
bad.
have to be in a little loop, just going around 2 or 3 years over and over.
And go back to the 1930s, but not have to progress beyond
Exactly,
that. Yeah.
exactly. Other than that, maybe late Victorian would be okay. Yeah, let's have gas lights and let's have decent railways and a proper police force, that kind of thing.
I like the idea of Edwardian times, when women were trying to get education.
Haven't done a suffragette novel yet.
I think it's because I've read too much Testament of Youth.
When you're starting a new story, how do you go about researching the historical side of it?
So once I've decided that I've got the idea for a story, that might well dictate when the timeline is. If I've got books already at home, and we do have a lot of books, and I'll dig those out and have a look through. So I've got about 3 Irish novels, and my husband being Irish, we've got a whole load of books on Irish history already at home. So what I'm just starting to sort of plan now is World War II, but it's set in Italy. And Italy had a very different
experience
to everywhere else. So I thought there's not a huge amount of detail of the politics, again, that I want to go into the novel, but I need to know it because it's the backdrop. So I then go out and buy whatever books seem to be. So unfortunately with this Italian one, I have bought the dullest book ever, trying to read the relevant chapters, and I'm like, stop. I don't care about these political parties. Just tell me what Mussolini was doing.
We won't ask you to name the book.
I'm sure it's good if you, depending on
if
your
you like
focus.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What would you say was most important to you in real life, and where can we see this reflected in your work?
Family. I love my sons, are fantastic grown-up sons. And my husband, I better mention him, otherwise he'll...
Just in case he listens to this.
And travel. And my husband, he's retired. I gave up the day job. I just write books now, and you can write anywhere. We travel a lot. We have a motorhome and we go away in the winters to Spain. And we're very much now of the age we're sort of best do it now while we can, because you never know what's going to happen next.
Yes.
So let's go out, let's take the time, spend the money, whatever, and just enjoy life to the full. And on top of that, I love mountains. I've got a thing about mountains.
We see the mountain in The Lost Diamond.
In chapter 1, where the girls are heading up to La Jonction, which is a real place where they then discover Wilfred's briefcase. I've done that exact walk. And it was probably one of the best days walking I've ever had. And I was with my family, a friend who's called Gabby, and her fella. And he, Trevor, has been up Everest.
Really?
Wow.
Yes. When we got down after that, Trevor said, that is the best day's walking I've ever had. I said, you've been up Everest?
Yes.
He said, look, it was just glorious, glorious day. And the views were spectacular and everything about it was absolutely amazing. So that day had to go in a book sooner or later, and it's there.
Again, thinking about your writing broadly, what would you say the biggest influences on you as a writer?
I really liked the books by Kate Morton, her early ones, and Catherine Webb, and they were both dual timeline. I loved them so much, and I couldn't find very many of that kind of book.
Yeah.
There's a lot more now, partly because I've written 15 of them.
There's a lot more now, and that's just you.
There's a lot of other people writing them now as well.
Yeah.
But at that time, I couldn't find very many, and I liked them so much. And so I'd say that those two writers, probably particularly Catherine Webb, I just loved her style. I knew that that's what I wanted to do myself. And then also there was a writer, Kate Long, who was a really good friend of mine, although I haven't seen her for a long time. But she was a big influence as well. We were together in a small online writing group at one point. I loved her novels, and I was very much inspired by her journey as a writer.
So what keeps you going with your writing?
Well, that's interesting. I can't not write, really. I mean, I'm not one of these people that say I have to write every day. It depends what stage I'm at with a book. When I'm first drafting, I do write almost every day. Might only be an hour or two because of all this travel. When I'm editing, it's different. I try and do it in a short burst. But I I get itchy if I don't
Yes.
write for a while, and I just, need to get on and write something. So I guess what keeps me going is just I love writing. Having said that, there is always a time with probably every book, what I call the sticky middle. You've written the start, which is
Yes.
great. You've introduced your characters, you're loving them, and you've got your end scenes all mapped out in your head. And then the sticky middle, and you've got to get from 20,000 words to 70,000 words. Is that middle 50 that
Yes.
that
Sounds familiar.
it's really hard work, and it's like wading through treacle at times. Other times it's okay. That one was okay. And I tend to write all of the historical first. I once tried it the other way around, but I got to the point in the contemporary story where they needed to start discovering what happened in the past. And they couldn't discover it because I hadn't written it yet.
Because you didn't know what it was
So I
yet.
didn't know. Yeah, exactly. That one. I've never been tempted to do that since. I might write the first couple of chapters of the contemporary to get me into it. And then I'll write the whole of the historical, and then I come back and put the contemporary ones in. And the bit I find the hardest is always the middle of the contemporary. I find the historicals easier to write.
You've touched on this already. The next 2 books are already written, did you say?
Any moment now I get my edits for the 1976 one. Then it's this Italian prisoner of war novel. I've got notes and I've got a very rough synopsis, and I need to plan that properly.
We shall look forward to it.
Have you got a good book recommendation?
Yes, sticking to my genre, the best dual timeline book I've ever read that I wish I'd written is Iona Gray's Letters to the Lost. And it's a Second World War one, and it is beautiful. It's so emotional, and it's just absolutely seamless the way it goes back and forth. Absolutely love that one.
Kathleen, thank you so much for being our guest.
You're very welcome.
Really enjoyed hearing more about your book and your writing process. Where can people find you online?
So I have a website, KathleenMcGurl.com. I'm also on Facebook, Kathleen McGurl author page there, and Instagram.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Yep, very welcome.
I really enjoyed that interview with Kathleen. I loved hearing about how the idea for the story came in part from a real life experience of her out walking in the mountains.
Yes, I loved the bit about the watch rising through the glacier and then somebody finding the original owner. That was just brilliant. I did notice, with all this talk of history, that you didn't say which period you'd like to live in.
No, I was thinking about it and struggling to come up with an answer, and then we moved on, so I didn't say anything. But my problem was most of the periods that I'd be really interested in are just frankly a bit too dangerous. I think if you pushed me, I'd probably go for a safer time period, albeit one that had its problems. I think I'd take the 1970s, largely because there would be so many great gigs I could go to, and I'd know all the right bands when they're starting out.
And still have access to antibiotics.
Yes, antibiotics and great music. That's my go-to requirements in life.
So thank you very much for listening to us. Please click like and subscribe. And if you really want to support us,
if you could leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on, that would be fantastic. We're really enjoying doing these. This is the first one that we've put out since our initial set of 3, and we've been thrilled with the response. So I hope you're enjoying them as much as we are. And if this is the first one you've listened to, lucky you have 3 more episodes already available. And if you've listened to everything, there's a new one out every 2 weeks. So thank you and enjoy.
goodbye.
Goodbye.